"Would you let me stand beside you, Clara Whitfield, for the rest of my days?" He said it plain. No kneeling. No ring turned in his palm. Just the question, offered across a fence rail in a soft April wind. The way a man might offer a cup of water to someone who had been thirsty a long time and did not yet know how to admit it. She did not answer at first. She looked at his hands, and at the wood between them, and at the mountains behind him going purple with evening, and she thought, for one silent, breath-held second, that maybe no one was going to speak next. Maybe the world would just keep on the way it always had. Then something in her chest, some small, stubborn thing she had buried for winters back, moved. But that comes later. First there was Clara. Clara Whitfield was 34 years old. Born in the winter of 1849 in a sod-roofed cabin on the eastern slope of the San Juan Range, 3 miles south of what would one day become the town of Durango, Colorado. Her father had been a blacksmith with a slow smile and a slower temper. Her mother had died of a fever the summer Clara turned 9, leaving her a walnut-wood hutch, a cracked porcelain teacup with pale blue flowers on it, and the knowledge of how to bank a stove fire so it would still be warm at 4 in the morning. Clara had grown up straight and quiet. With brown hair she braided herself before dawn and steady gray eyes and hands that were never idle. She had married Samuel Whitfield at 22, in the little clapboard church on the north end of Pueblo, and they had come out to the ranch her father left her and worked it together for 8 good years. Then Samuel had gone to town for a barrel of nails one November morning and come back coughing, and by Christmas Eve she had washed his face and closed his eyes and buried him in the plot behind the cottonwoods, near the older, smaller grave of the boy they had lost 7 days after his birth the winter before. 4 years, then, of running 160 acres and 42 head of cattle by herself. 4 years of the neighbors bringing pies the first winter and stopping bringing them by the second. 4 years of the women in Durango saying poor Clara with a soft, sorry pity that had somehow, over time, curdled into a settled town opinion. Clara Whitfield was a widow and widows stayed widows, and it was a kindness to leave her be. She had come to believe it herself. At 34, she rose before the sun, saw to the stock, worked the ledger at the kitchen table by lamplight, mended her own fences, drove her own wagon into town on Tuesdays for flour and salt and thread. She kept the cracked teacup on a shelf where the morning light hit it. She did not go to the harvest dance. She did not go to the Christmas supper. She did not, when Mrs. Halloran mentioned this cousin or that widower, do anything but nod politely and change the subject to the weather. She had stopped, sometime between the 3rd winter and the 4th, expecting to be chosen. There is a particular quiet a woman learns when she has decided, without ever saying so, that the good part of her life has already happened. It is not bitter. It is not even sad most days. It is just a kind of folding in of hopes tucked smaller, of plans made only as far as next season, of the eye taught not to linger too long on other people's lit windows in the evening. Clara had that quiet in her the way some women carry a fragrance. You could not have named it. But if you had known her, you would have felt it, and you would have understood, without being told, why the men of Durango tipped their hats to her on the boardwalk and then walked on. The stranger's name was Jonas Reed. He rode into the valley in the last week of February 1883 on a bay gelding with a white blaze and one white sock, and he had a rolled bedroll behind his saddle and a rifle in a scabbard and a Bible in his saddlebag that had belonged to his mother. He was 36 years old and stood 6 foot even. With black hair he cut himself when it got past his collar, a full but neatly kept beard shot through with the first traces of gray at the chin, and eyes the color of creek stones. A settled, quiet gray that did not miss much. His skin was weathered brown from 4 seasons of Wyoming work. He wore a dark canvas coat that had seen a great deal of weather, a plain flannel shirt buttoned to the throat, denim trousers, and boots that had been resoled twice. He held himself square-shouldered and unhurried, the way a man holds himself when he has decided long ago that hurry does no work worth doing. He seldom smiled with his teeth. When he was pleased about something, the corners of his eyes softened first, and the mouth followed only later, and sometimes not at all. He had been born in a farmhouse outside Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He had lost his younger brother to the war when he himself was 12 and too small to go. He had, at 24, married a girl named Adelaide Reed with soft yellow hair and a laugh like water over stones, and he had loved her the plain, undramatic way some men love, without display, and utterly. She had died of childbed fever in the spring of 1877, along with the daughter they had not yet named. He had put a marker on their shared grave that read only her first name and the year, because he had not been able to bring himself to write anything more. He had drifted west after that. He had worked cattle in Wyoming for 5 years and saved his wages in a leather pouch he kept inside his coat. He had come south in February of 1883 because a man in Cheyenne had told him land was still fair down along the San Juans, and because the loneliness of the bunkhouse in the 5th year had begun to feel like a kind of wearing out he could not afford to let finish him. He came for land. He was not looking for anything else. He would have told you so, and he would have meant it. He stopped, that first afternoon, at the little livery in Durango to see about grain. He was leaning on the paddock rail counting bills when the widow Whitfield drove her wagon past on her Tuesday errand, sitting straight-backed on the bench, gloved hands steady on the reins, and he watched her go by the way a man watches weather move across a distant ridge, with a kind of attentive stillness he did not himself understand. "That's the Whitfield place out east," said the liveryman, following his eyes without meaning to. "Runs it herself. Has for 4 winters. Good land. Good woman. Don't waste your time, though, mister. She don't." Jonas Reed didn't answer that. He paid for his grain, mounted, rode east out of town along the creek, and reached the fence line of a 160-acre spread just as the sun went low behind the peaks. He sat his horse a long moment looking at it. Then he turned north, made a dry camp along the creek, ate cold biscuits from his saddlebag, and slept under the cottonwoods. He was there again the next morning, before the sun was properly up, walking the length of the north-pasture fence on foot with his coat collar turned against a cold wind. The fence was in poor shape. Winter had done its work. A dozen posts leaned, and a full stretch of maybe 40 yards had gone down entirely under a snow-heavy branch. He walked the length of it twice. He counted, in his head, 47 bad posts. Then he rode back into Durango, bought 47 fresh cedar posts, a bag of nails, and a heavy maul, loaded them into a wagon he hired for the day, drove them out to the north edge of the Whitfield land, and started to work. He did not knock at her door. He did not ride up and ask permission. He set the wagon along the creek out of sight of the house, and he took off his coat and folded it over the wagon rail, and he began, in the sleet that came in off the mountains at mid-morning, to dig new post holes in the half-frozen ground. By noon he was working in wet sleet in shirt-sleeves with the flannel plastered to his back. By dusk, 30 of the 47 posts were sunk and set true. He drove back into town in the dark, slept in the livery, and returned before dawn the next morning. Clara found him on the 3rd day. She rode out on her Tuesday errand, which was not a Tuesday, which was a Wednesday, which she noticed. She had been meaning, for a week, to see about the north fence herself. She topped the low rise above the creek, and she stopped her horse, and she sat there in her saddle a long time watching a man she did not know set the last of a run of new cedar posts against the pale March sky. She rode down. He straightened when he heard her come, and he took his hat off and he waited. "Who are you?" she said. Not a question. A statement.
Jonas Reed, Mom.
Out of Iowa most recently. Cheyenne before that. Whose fence is that?
Yours, Mom.
Then why are you fixing it? He looked at the wood in his hand, and then at the mountains, and then, briefly, at her. It needed fixing, he said. She sat her horse another long moment. The wind moved in the cottonwoods along the creek, the older ones with the pale, peeling bark, still bare in early March, the branches making the small, dry, ticking sound they always made in spring wind. Somewhere off in the distance a cow bawled, and another one answered. "I'll pay you a day's wage," she said. "I'd rather you didn't." He set the maul down against the wagon rail. He was careful how he said it, the way a careful man is careful with all his tools. "Because I'd rather work here a while," he said, "and see if I'd like to make you an offer on the 20 acres of scrub timber along your east line, if you'd ever consider selling. And I'd rather not owe you anything before I ask." She looked at him a long time. She looked at the fence, which was better than she could have done herself in twice the days. She looked at his hands, which were split and bleeding a little at the knuckles from the sleet and the cold and the maul, and which he did not seem to have noticed. "Suit yourself, Mr. Reed," she said. "But you'll take coffee at noon." That was how it began. He worked her fences for a week. Then, when the fences were done, he asked, at the well one morning, if she'd want the roof on the hay barn patched before the April rains. And she said she would, and he did that too. Then a rotted plank on the porch step. Then the hutch drawer that had stuck since her mother's time. He took it off its runners without asking, sanded the swollen seam smooth on the porch in the evening light, waxed the joint with a bit of tallow, and put it back so it slid open with the softest pull of 2 fingers. He never said, "Look what I did." He would just set the drawer sliding and walk out to the barn. Clara, at her leisure that night, opened the hutch drawer 4 times. She was 34 years old, and she had lived in that house since she was 22, and until that evening she had not been able to open the drawer without a hard, bitter wrench of both hands. She sat a long time that night with the lamp low, and she thought about it. The town chorus began the week after. Mrs. Halloran at the post office said, "I hear you have a man out at your place these days, Clara." "I have a hired hand for the season," Clara said. Said Mrs. Halloran, sorting envelopes and not looking up. "A hired hand. Bess Callahan at the Mercantile, Clara, honey. Ida Baker says he sits at your table at supper." "He sits at the far end of the table with his hat off, Bess Callahan. The way any decent man would." Said Bess. Ida Baker herself on the boardwalk. "Clara, my lord. He's a fine-looking man. Are you blind?" "I am 34 years old, Ida, and I am not blind, and I am not 18, and I am not looking." Said Ida. And Ruth Cordell, the doctor's wife, gentlest of them, met her at the church steps on a Sunday and only said, "Clara, it has been 4 winters. A long enough time, dear. A long, long enough time." Clara went home from town that Sunday, and she sat on her porch with a shawl over her shoulders and watched Jonas Reed splitting kindling at the woodpile with a slow, even swing, and she thought, with a sudden lurch of the heart that surprised her, "I do not know what I would do if he rode away tomorrow." That frightened her. She had learned, for winters back, exactly what it cost to lose a person you had let yourself need. She had paid that price down to the last coin, and she had promised herself, at Samuel's graveside in the sleet, that she would not spend it again. She was not going to spend it again. So she folded her hands. She kept her voice pleasant at the table. She spoke to him of weather and of cattle and of the price of nails. She did not ever ask him about the ring he did not wear on a finger that showed the pale, worn band of one, or about the small leather Bible he kept in his saddlebag with a woman's name written inside the cover, or about the fact that he sometimes, at dusk, stood at the corral rail with his hat in his hand looking east at nothing, for a long time. She would have said, if you had asked her, that she was being sensible. She was, in fact, doing exactly what she had promised herself never to do again. She was letting a man become the shape of her evenings. She was hearing his step on the porch and knowing it before she saw him. She was learning the sound of his laugh, that rare, low sound, more breath than voice, and finding herself listening for it. She was catching herself at the hutch, at the drawer that opened easily now, and being unable to close it without smiling. Grief doesn't leave. It just learns to share the house with other things. The schoolmaster came in the 2nd week of March. His name was Percival Hume. He was 38, a widower with 2 small daughters, the new schoolmaster in Durango, and by every measure the women of the town had already decided upon he was the exact right sort of man for Clara Whitfield. He was educated. He was gentle. He had a good salary and a small, tidy house near the church. He had lost his wife 2 years back and had grieved cleanly and privately, and everyone agreed, well. He came out to the ranch on a Saturday afternoon with his hat in his hand and a small tin of pressed violets from Denver as a gift. He sat at Clara's porch on the good chair. He drank the coffee she poured. He spoke of Durango, of the school, of his hopes for a proper library, of his 2 daughters, who were 7 and 9 and named after wildflowers. He was, in every particular, a good man. Jonas Reed was, that afternoon, in the north-pasture mending harness, out of sight of the porch. He did not come in. He had heard the wagon come, and he had looked at it from the far ridge, and he had gone back to the harness with his mouth set. Percival Hume, at the end of an hour, set his cup down and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I will not waste your time or mine. I have a good position, a good house, and 2 motherless girls who need a woman's steady hand. I would be honored, in time, if you would consider becoming my wife. I do not ask for an answer today. I ask only that you consider it." Clara Whitfield looked at him a long moment. She thought of the 2 little girls she had never met. She thought of the tidy house near the church. She thought of the pressed violets, sweet and dry, and of the way this man's hands rested on his knees, quiet and clean and educated and kind. She thought of the town and of Mrs. Halloran and Bess Callahan and Ida Baker and gentle Ruth Cordell, all of them nodding, all of them relieved. She thought of Jonas Reed's hand on the hutch drawer. "Mr. Hume," she said, "you are a fine man. I know what you're offering, and I know what it costs a man to say it plain. I will consider it honestly." He nodded. He rose. He set the tin of violets on the porch rail. Then he paused and he said, without heat, and without wheedling, and with only a small and honest ache in his voice, "Mrs. Whitfield, I know there is a hand working your place. I know what the town says. I will say only one thing to you, because I owe my daughters more than pride. I am the safer choice. I am not the more exciting one. But I would be steady with you. Please do not turn me away because you have mistaken quiet safety for the thing that is missing. That is all I will say." Then he tipped his hat and he got into his wagon, and he drove down the lane in the pale March light, and the lane was very long and very straight, and he did not look back. Clara sat on the porch a long time after he was gone. She was still sitting there when Jonas came in from the north-pasture at dusk. He set the mended harness inside the barn door. He washed his hands at the well. He came up onto the porch with his hat in his hand, the way he always did, and he looked at her, and he saw at once that something in her had gone quiet in a new way. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Sit down, Mr. Reed," she said. "I'd like to speak with you." He sat. She looked at him a long time. Then she said, "Mr. Hume came out here today and asked me to marry him." Jonas Reed did not move. She watched his hands. His hands did not move either. The eyes went to the porch boards, and then, after a moment, back up to her face. Steady, without argument, without display. "He is a good man," she said. "He is," said Jonas Reed. "He has 2 little girls. So I heard. He would be steady with me. I believe he would, ma'am." She looked out at the mountains, which were going indigo now, the last light gone gold along the ridgeline of the San Juans, and she said, in a voice so low she could scarcely hear it herself, "Mr. Reed, why are you still here?" There was a long, long silence. He set his hat very carefully on his knee. Then he looked up. He did not smile. His eyes were the color of creek stones, and they did not look away. "Miss Clara," he said, "I would like to walk up to the north fence line with you tomorrow morning, if you'd let me. There is something I would like to say to you there, plain, and I would like you to hear it in that place and no other. That is all I will ask tonight." She looked at him. She thought of Samuel. She thought of the small grave in the cottonwoods. She thought of Percival Hume's straight, receding wagon. She thought, with a strange, half-frightened calm, that she had not, in 4 winters, felt so afraid or so entirely awake. "All right, Mr. Reed," she said. He nodded once. He rose. He put his hat on. He went out to the barn to sleep in the loft, as he had every night since he came, and she sat alone on her porch until the stars came out very cold above the mountains, and she did not, that night, sleep well. The morning came pale and clear. April now. The cottonwoods along the creek had just begun to green at the tips. The mountains were still snow-crowned, but the low pastures had begun, in patches, to soften and to turn. The air smelled of thaw and of new grass and of the wet earth of a country coming, at last, out of a long winter. Clara put on her good gray dress with the high collar and the long sleeves and the small pearl button at the throat that had been her mother's. She braided her hair carefully. She tied a dark shawl about her shoulders. She walked out into the yard at 7, and Jonas Reed was waiting at the corral rail with his hat in his hand. They walked, without speaking, the half-mile up the low grade to the north-pasture fence line. He had rebuilt it, that fence, 6 weeks back. 47 new cedar posts, straight as sentries, running east and west across the top of the rise. She had ridden past it a dozen times since. She had never, until that morning, walked its full length on foot. At the corner post, the northeast corner, where her land ended and the open range began, where you could see, from that high place, the whole valley opening south toward Durango and the great dim shoulders of the San Juans rising west. He stopped and he turned to her. "Miss Clara," he said, "I want to say it here because this is the line of your place. I would not say it inside your house. That is your house. This is the boundary of it, and it seems to me a man ought to say the true things at the boundary." She said nothing. She waited. "My name is Jonas Reed. I am 36 years old. I was married once to a girl named Adelaide, and I loved her, and she died in the spring of '77, and I did not think, when I rode south this February, that I was ever going to want to say what I am about to say to you. I came here for 20 acres of scrub timber. That was all I came here for. I want you to know that first, before I say the rest, because I do not want to have deceived you in anything." He paused. The wind moved the tips of the cottonwoods below them. "The rest," he said, "is that I do not care about the 20 acres of scrub timber. I stopped caring about it the day I fixed a drawer that had been stuck for 12 years, and I saw you open it 4 times that night, and I understood that you had lived a long time in a house that did not let you have small, easy things. I have been trying, since that day, to make you as many small, easy things as I know how to make. I would like to keep on doing that. I would like to do that here on this land, for as many years as I have left." He drew in a slow breath. "Would you let me stand beside you, Clara Whitfield, for the rest of my days?" There it was, plain. No kneeling. No ring turned in his palm. Only the question, offered across the top rail of the northeast fence in a soft April wind. The way a man might offer a cup of water to someone who had been thirsty a long time and did not yet know how to admit it. She looked at his hands. She looked at the wood between them. She looked at the mountains behind him, going gold now with sunrise. She thought of her mother's hutch. She thought of Samuel and of the small grave in the cottonwoods, and of Adelaide in her Iowa churchyard, and of Percival Hume driving down the long straight lane and not looking back. She thought of Mrs. Halloran and of Bess Callahan and of Ida Baker and of gentle Ruth Cordell, and of the whole town of Durango having quietly agreed, for 4 winters, that Clara Whitfield's story had already been told. She thought, for one silent, breath-held second, that maybe no one was going to speak next, and maybe the world would just keep on the way it always had. Then something in her chest moved. "Mr. Reed," she said, and her voice was steady, and she was surprised at how steady it was. "I have not been chosen in a very long time. I stopped some time back expecting to be. I do not know if I am practiced at it anymore." "You do not have to be practiced at it, Miss Clara. You only have to say yes." She looked at him a long moment, and she said, in a voice quieter than the wind, "Yes." He did not, then, do any of the loud things a man in a lesser story might have done. He did not embrace her at the fence line. He did not weep. He did not say beautiful, extravagant sentences. He set his hat very carefully back on his head. He looked for a long moment at the country running south from her land, the country that was now, in a way it had not been an hour before, going to be his to keep faith with too. Then he reached across the top rail of the fence, and he took her gloved hand in his, and he held it. That was all. They walked back down to the house in the new April sun without speaking. He was quiet the way a man is quiet who is thinking about the rest of his life. She was quiet the way a woman is quiet who has been given, past all hoping, the thing she had folded away for winters back and told herself never to want again. That is what love looks like when it doesn't announce itself. It just quietly faces east. He built her, that summer, a small window seat on the east side of the porch. He did not tell her why. He measured and he sawed and he sanded and he set it in, and he framed a small square window above it so that the first morning light would fall directly there, and only there from the moment the sun came over the ridge. She stood in the doorway the morning he finished it, with her coffee cup in her hand, and she looked at it a long time, and she did not say anything at all. He was in the yard turning a horse out. He did not look up, but the corners of his eyes softened. She had never told him about the boy she had lost, and the 7 days he had lived, and how she had held him at the window with the first eastern light on his small face because she had wanted him, for whatever short time she had him, to know what morning looked like. Somehow, without being told, he had built her the room for that grief to sit in. She sat down in the window seat that morning and she wept for the first time in 4 years. Not a loud weeping. Quiet, dignified one. The kind that ends with a woman drying her face on the corner of her apron and going back to the stove. They were married in the little clapboard church in Pueblo, on a Saturday in June, with the cottonwoods full-leafed along the creek and the whole town of Durango in the pews. Mrs. Halloran wept openly. Bess Callahan and Ida Baker sat holding hands in the second row. Ruth Cordell smiled at Clara over her handkerchief as she came down the aisle. Percival Hume was there too, in the back with his 2 small daughters in matching dresses. He had come, he told Clara afterward at the reception on the church lawn, because a man who wishes another man's life well has no business staying home. She thanked him. She meant it. He tipped his hat, and he took his little girl's hands, and he walked out of the reception before the dancing began. And she remembered him kindly, always, from that day forward. 10 years later, it was 1893 now, and Clara Reed was 44 years old. She stood at the northeast corner of the north-pasture fence line with her husband and their 2 boys, Samuel and Adelaide's namesakes both, aged 8 and 6, and she watched the sun come up over the San Juans and turn the fresh new grass to gold. Jonas stood beside her at the top rail of the fence. She was thinking about her mother's hutch, which had followed her into her second life, and about a small east-facing window on a porch, where a boy she had lost had once, 7 days only, seen morning. "Jonas Reed," she said. "Miss Clara, would you let me stand beside you, Jonas Reed, for the rest of my days?" He did not look at her at once. He looked, first, at the 2 boys running along the fence line ahead of them in the low pale light, then at the mountains, then at last at her. "You already do, Miss Clara," he said very quietly. "You already do." She smiled. She looked out across the country, and she thought, with a settled, unafraid gladness she would not have believed herself capable of, for winters back, that she had, after all, been chosen. That is what this story is about. And it is a thing that, if you are patient about it, and if you do not close the door too early on your own life, may yet be true of yours. There will be, in every life, a stretch of years when you decide, without ever quite saying so, that the good part has already happened, that you have used up your portion, that the town has settled its opinion of you and you may as well settle it too. If you are in that stretch tonight, if you are the person nobody thinks of when they are pairing off the world, I would ask you gently to leave a small door open. Not a large door, just a small one, just enough that a good, quiet, competent person, if such a person should one day ride into your valley with a bay gelding and a rolled bedroll and a set of tools he has kept sharp, may find some way to walk in and start mending your fences without asking, and stay long enough to build you a window that faces east. Thank you, from my heart, for sitting with this one all the way through. Stories like Clara and Jonas's are why I keep telling them, because the world is louder than it used to be, and the quiet, patient, chosen kinds of love are the ones we most easily forget to notice. If this one moved you tonight, would you let me know, in a word or two, where you are watching from? I like to picture the porches and the kitchens and the lamplit rooms these stories are traveling to. Until next time, keep riding. If Clara's story stayed with you, come sit with the next one. The tale of a widower in the same county who was seen, every Sunday for a year, leaving fresh wildflowers on a grave that wasn't his, and the schoolteacher who finally, one October morning at the churchyard gate, worked up the courage to ask him why.